How did the German army become one of the most feared fighting forces in history? How did a nation that had been crippled by World War I and the Treaty of Versailles rise to launch a devastating war across Europe? The Wehrmacht wasn't just strong, it was revolutionary. Blitzkrieg tactics, cutting-edge technology, elite training and ruthless efficiency turned it into a war machine that crushed its enemies in lightning-fast offensives. But was it superior strategy, sheer discipline, or something far darker that fueled their dominance? Today, we dive deep into the secrets of the German war machine, the brutal realities that made them a force the world would never forget.
Gehen Sie in Abwehrstellung. Wir wissen, wie viele es sind.
After World War I, the German army hadn't been beaten on the battlefield. It simply ran out of resources and was overcome by war weariness at home. When these proud soldiers returned from the ravaged landscapes of France and Belgium, they were celebrated as heroes in Germany. But things took a dramatic turn with the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty harshly blamed Germany for the war, stirring up resentment and laying the groundwork for the rise of the new German regime, and eventually another, even more devastating global conflict. During the chaotic interwar years, the German army, known as the Heer, managed to survive. Its leaders even set up secret methods to work around the treaty's strict rule that limited the army to just 100,000 men. Built on a legacy of skill and efficiency, the Heer had a command structure that many admired. On the eve of World War II, the Oberkommando des Heers, OKH, was the main body through which the army's top strategists put their plans into action. However, Hitler changed the game by undermining this respected general staff, reducing its influence and power. Instead, he placed himself at the very top of a new military hierarchy and established a separate senior body, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. Although there was notable opposition to Hitler from within the military, many senior officers of the Heer were captivated by his early dazzling victories. They eagerly embraced the German plan for conquest, convinced that their nation was destined for greatness. As Hitler's ambitions grew and Europe was sent into its second major war in less than 25 years, some officers hesitantly argued that Germany might not be militarily or economically ready for such a conflict until 1942. Yet, Hitler's impatience led him to speed up his agenda, and on September 1st, 1939, the invasion of Poland ignited the spark that would soon engulf the world in war. These officers weren't just following orders, they had taken a personal oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler. This commitment was based on the Führer principle, a doctrine that declared the Führer's word is above all written law. Though the idea was influenced by social Darwinism and wasn't solely a German creation, its robust application over the 12 years of the Third Reich left an indelible mark on German military culture. In fact, during the Nuremberg trials after the war, several high-ranking Germans even invoked this principle as a defense for their actions. This deep-seated loyalty and belief in Hitler's absolute authority played a critical role in shaping Germany's aggressive strategies. Personal oaths and unwavering devotion to a single leader can drive entire nations to take dramatic and often dangerous risks. The legacy of this mindset not only influenced military decisions but also forever altered the course of modern history. Following the Blomberg and Frisch scandals in the late 1930s, two key obstacles to Hitler's complete takeover of the German armed forces were swept away. With these challenges removed, Hitler appointed Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel as the Commander-in-Chief of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW. Keitel was a seasoned career officer, having already served as the Chief of the Armed Forces Office. Keitel's rise was intertwined with his earlier connections. He had been appointed by Defense Minister Werner von Blomberg, a man who was once a close friend, a World War I veteran who had been wounded in battle and steadily climbed the ranks during the interwar period of the Reichswehr. Keitel grew increasingly alienated from Blomberg when his idea for a unified command structure for all the German armed forces was dismissed. Ironically, as Hitler began moving towards such a unified command, Keitel's cooperative nature positioned him perfectly for this new role. Once at the helm of OKW, Keitel restructured the organization to meet the demands of a modern military force. He established an economic section led by Major General Georg Thomas, an intelligence section under Admiral Canaris, and an operations section commanded by Colonel General Alfred Jodl. Over time, Keitel's loyalty to Hitler became almost absolute. At the Nuremberg trials, he famously asserted that the Führer principle, the Führer's word is above all written law, was not only natural but essential for military operations, reflecting his blind obedience. However, there was a rare moment when Keitel's own judgment surfaced. During the planning stages of Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union, he objected that the plan was overly ambitious. His dissent did not sit well with Hitler, who was notorious for his intolerance of criticism. When Keitel offered his resignation in protest, Hitler refused, declaring that only he could decide if and when a military leader should step aside. From that point on, Keitel became nothing short of a slavish servant to the Führer, a shift so pronounced that some of his fellow officers even started referring to him as Lack Eitel, or lackey. Every German soldier of that era was an integral cog in a vast and formidable war machine, meticulously trained, rigorously organized, and primed for conquest. While countless men donned the uniform of the Heer, only a select few attained the esteemed rank of officer, underscoring the elite nature of military leadership within this massive force. As the 1930s unfolded, the Heer experienced explosive growth, and with it a profound evolution in the character of its officer corps. The long-standing tradition of Prussian and German aristocratic leadership began to wane. This shift was driven by several factors: Hitler's deep-seated mistrust of the established elite, the sheer scale of military expansion which demanded a rapid influx of new officers. As the pressures of an escalating war mounted, the ranks of leadership opened up to individuals who might not have traditionally climbed the ladder, those who proved their mettle through battlefield heroism, exceptional merit, or simply by stepping into the breach as casualties mounted. Within this evolving military framework, officers were classified into three distinct categories based on their experience and the unique circumstances that led to their ascension. Before World War II, the Reserve Officer Corps was primarily made up of non-commissioned officers who had already demonstrated exceptional service. Upon discharge from active duty, these veterans were often commissioned as reserve officers. Additionally, there were conscripts who, by excelling during their first year of service, caught the attention of their superiors and were fast-tracked into leadership roles. A further group of reservists, those who met a rigorous educational standard, were designated as officer cadets. These cadets received extensive, specialized training to prepare them for leading infantry platoons, and were required to participate in annual training exercises, ensuring their skills remained sharp and their readiness uncompromised. In parallel, the Standing Heer maintained its own robust officer cadre, which was further divided into two key groups. The first comprised the General Staff Corps, a select group of officers identified for their potential to command at the highest levels, who underwent specialized training to navigate the complex demands of strategic leadership. The second group consisted of regular officers actively engaged in the day-to-day operations of the military, holding various command and staff positions across the hierarchy. As the war intensified, the demand for experienced leaders spurred the recall of many retired officers, and field promotions of capable non-commissioned officers became increasingly common. This dynamic system of classification and promotion not only reflected the Heer's ability to adapt under pressure, but also highlighted the relentless drive to maintain effective leadership amid the challenges of a protracted and brutal conflict. The intense need for manpower during the conflict led to many conscripts extending their service well beyond their initial enlistment period. Among these men, a select few either stepped forward voluntarily or were identified as possessing the qualities necessary to become reserve officers. These individuals underwent rigorous officer training, received reserve commissions, and committed themselves to serve until the war's end. This approach not only preserved essential skills within the ranks, but also built a reservoir of potential leaders ready to be called upon as the demands of the battlefield grew ever more acute. As the war escalated, the process for promoting soldiers to officer status became both rapid and adaptive. Based on their combat experience and demonstrated leadership capabilities, many soldiers were elevated to officer ranks after only a few months of targeted training. Although the typical training period for officer candidates could extend up to 20 months under normal circumstances, the urgent need for capable field leaders, exacerbated by rising casualty rates, led to accelerated promotion practices. In some cases, candidates were credited with active duty experience despite limited combat exposure, ensuring that the military maintained a steady flow of officers capable of navigating the ever-changing challenges of wartime operations. Although the onset of the National Socialist era gradually diminished the traditional elite status of the German officer corps, the pre-war life of an officer was marked by notable privileges and respect. Officers enjoyed generous pay, superior accommodations, and high-quality provisions, reflecting the esteemed position they held within the military hierarchy. Upon commissioning, they received a uniform allowance as a token of their new status, although they were later required to finance their own uniforms. This arrangement not only underscored the respect and expectations associated with their role, but also highlighted the broader cultural values of honour, responsibility, and personal accountability that were integral to the military tradition of the era. During wartime, the urgent need for officers often forced a shortening of training periods, yet the standard regimen for regular officers remained impressively rigorous. Candidates began with 10 months of fundamental infantry and non-commissioned officer schooling under the guidance of the Ersatzheer, replacement army, a phase designed to instill essential combat skills and tactical knowledge. This was followed by a crucial 7-month stint in the field where aspiring officers joined active units, participated in real-world operations, and received training in specialized settings such as staff environments or combat arms schools. The training culminated in 3 months of advanced, specialized instruction in areas like infantry, armor, artillery, or support branches. Reserve officer candidates experienced a similar curriculum, though their training was marked by more intensive oversight from the Ersatzheer, ensuring that every potential leader was rigorously prepared to face the rapidly evolving challenges of battle. The Heer's training doctrine, with its unwavering focus on offensive action and leading from the front, demanded extraordinary courage from its officers. This philosophy required leaders to engage directly with enemy forces, setting an example for their troops, but also exposing themselves to significant risks. The price of this approach was steep. By the end of World War II, over 80 German generals had been killed in action, and many more had sustained serious wounds. Between September 1939 and March 1942 alone, more than 16,000 German officers lost their lives, with the majority of these losses occurring on the brutal Eastern Front. These figures not only highlight the relentless nature of the conflict, but also underscore the profound sacrifices demanded by a military culture that placed a premium on frontline leadership and personal valor. The non-commissioned officer was truly the backbone of the army in the field, embodying both career soldiers and those selected from the ranks of conscripts who distinguished themselves during training. Some of these men voluntarily applied for non-commissioned officer roles, or were identified for their potential, and they were designated as part of a reserve component, distinguishing them from those who had pursued a military career from the beginning. Within this structure, non-commissioned officers were divided into 2 distinct groups: senior and junior. Young men were given an early start in their military journey. Those over 16 could apply for non-commissioned officer training and join the army by the age of 17. For active soldiers seeking this advancement, a minimum of 1 year of service post-conscription was required before they could apply. Depending on the soldier's age and experience, the initial service terms varied, offering commitments of either 4 years and 6 months or as long as 12 years. Their training began with 4 months of basic instruction, setting the foundation for discipline and fundamental skills, followed by 6 months of specialized training tailored to the needs of various branches such as infantry, artillery, armor, or mountain troops. As the war intensified, the training regimen was significantly modified to meet the ever-growing demand for capable leaders in combat. Early on, the structured approach involved lengthy and thorough instruction, but later in the conflict, the basic training phase was accelerated by incorporating it directly into active units rather than in a traditional school setting. This was then typically followed by about 5 months serving as a squad commander, or even a shorter period for those assigned to specialized roles. In many instances, particularly for soldiers with extensive combat experience, the entire non-commissioned officer training was condensed to less than 3 months. For Germany, World War II wasn't just another war, it was framed as a battle for total survival. The scars of World War I still ran deep, and every soldier was made to believe that defeat this time would mean something far worse than the Treaty of Versailles. The German people had seen their country humiliated, their economy shattered, and their military stripped to almost nothing after 1918. When Hitler rose to power, he fed on this resentment, rallying the nation with the promise of revival, strength, and vengeance. The message was clear. This war wasn't just about victory, it was about avoiding complete destruction of Germany and Europe. Every German soldier knew what happened the last time they lost a war. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles had crippled Germany, territories were taken, the economy was burdened with impossible reparations, and the once proud military was reduced to a mere 100,000 men. Barely enough to defend the country. In the years that followed, hyperinflation, mass unemployment, and political instability fueled a sense of desperation. Hitler's rise was built on the promise that Germany would never suffer such humiliation again. The Wehrmacht was instilled with this belief. They were taught that this war was a matter of life and death, lose, and Germany would cease to exist as they knew it. Propaganda reinforced this fear relentlessly. Hitler and Goebbels portrayed Germany as a nation under siege, surrounded by enemies who sought its total annihilation. The war wasn't just against Britain, France, or the Soviet Union. It was against the forces that, as the regime claimed, had conspired to destroy Germany after 1918. This message was hammered into soldiers and civilians alike. They weren't just fighting for conquest, they were fighting for the survival of their homeland, their families, and their future. This belief fueled the German war effort immensely. In the early years, their military campaigns were executed with ruthless precision. Poland fell in weeks, France collapsed in mere months, and German forces pushed deep into Soviet territory. Their confidence was high, their strength was undeniable, but when the tide began to turn after Stalingrad, after the defeat in North Africa, the propaganda intensified. Total war was declared in 1943, and the German people were told to prepare for absolute sacrifice. Every factory was repurposed for the war effort, every resource was directed to the front. Surrender was never an option. Even as the Allies advanced on all fronts, the German people were reminded of what happened in 1918, occupation, starvation, and humiliation. Germany ensured they believed that losing again would mean even greater suffering. This led to some of the fiercest resistance seen in the war. On the Eastern Front, in Normandy, in the Ardennes. In the final days, Hitler ordered the defense of Berlin, throwing every last man, woman, and child into the fight, because in the eyes of Germany, Germany could not afford to surrender. In the end, the idea that this war was for Germany's survival pushed its soldiers to fight harder, resist longer, and sacrifice more than almost any other army in history. They fought not just for orders, but for the belief that their very nation was at stake. This mentality, though ultimately leading to ruin, made the Wehrmacht one of the most determined and relentless fighting forces the world had ever seen. The heart of the German military machine was the Lanzer, the ordinary foot soldier, most often a conscript summoned into service by local civil police authorities. While volunteers enjoyed the distinct advantage of choosing their branch of service, the vast majority were drafted. These men received detailed call-up letters by mail, complete with precise instructions on where to report and how to travel, marking the beginning of their military journey. Upon receiving their notifications, conscripts were required to register and undergo 2 comprehensive physical examinations to assess their fitness for duty. Based on these evaluations, they were either assigned to a specific unit immediately or sent home until further needed for active duty. This meticulous process ensured that every soldier was fit for the rigors of military life from the very start. Once enlisted, these soldiers were first integrated into a unit within the Ersatzheer, the replacement army that served as a preparatory training ground before transitioning to the main field force known as the Feldheer. The initial training phase lasted 16 weeks, during which conscripts developed physical strength, mastered essential command and control techniques, and learned fire and maneuver tactics. This rigorous program familiarized them with a range of weapons and instilled the fundamental skills necessary to operate effectively at the platoon level. Discipline and strict regulations were cornerstones of the Heer's training philosophy. The training environment was notoriously harsh, with a constant emphasis on maintaining order and ensuring unwavering obedience to commands. Both the High Command, including the OKW and the General Staff, endorsed severe measures to enforce discipline. The consequences for infractions were draconian. Disobedience or desertion could lead to immediate execution, and there were even instances where officers deemed to have faltered in their duties were summarily executed. This uncompromising approach was considered vital to sustaining the fighting effectiveness of the troops in an increasingly brutal conflict. The training regimen itself was built on time-tested methods from the interwar Reichswehr and the covert military build-up preceding the war. Soldiers endured long, forced marches carrying full combat loads, participated in live-fire drills, and underwent relentless conditioning exercises. These demanding routines often pushed men to their limits. Some even perished from sheer exhaustion, and injuries were a common occurrence. With days stretching from sunrise well past dusk, the relentless pace of training left little room for respite. Despite its reputation as one of the most mechanized armies of the era, only about 20% of the Heer was actually motorized during World War II. This meant that many soldiers continued to rely on foot movement in a rapidly modernizing battlefield. Moreover, those assigned to artillery or logistical roles received specialized training that extended beyond their core responsibilities, including the essential care and management of the unit's horses, a skill critical to maintaining mobility and ensuring effective support. Fundamentally, basic infantry training was mandatory for every soldier, regardless of the branch they would eventually serve in. For example, personnel destined for the artillery were required to complete the standard infantry course before attending an additional 3-month intensive artillery school. This universal requirement ensured that all soldiers, irrespective of specialization, were grounded in the core tactics and discipline that defined the operational doctrine of the Heer. Published in 1945, a US Army technical manual on German military organization opens with a striking excerpt from Hitler's military service law of May 21, 1935. The law proclaimed military service as an honorary commitment to the German people, declaring that every German was liable to serve, and in times of war, both German men and women were duty-bound to defend the fatherland. This declaration laid the groundwork for a conscription system designed to mobilize the entire nation in the pursuit of military strength and national pride. From 1935 onward, German men were required to serve from their 18th birthday until the end of the month following their 45th birthday. As the war dragged on, the state dramatically extended these age limits, from conscripting individuals as young as 17 to calling on men up to the age of 61. In the final desperate days of the Third Reich, the need for manpower became so acute that boys as young as 12 were pressed into service to help defend the burning ruins of Berlin. Those not immediately fit for active duty were categorized into various reserve components, ready to be activated at a moment's notice, illustrating the regime's commitment to exhausting every available resource. At its peak during World War II, the Heer swelled to nearly 10 million men, a testament to the massive mobilization efforts of Germany. Between 1939 and 1945, this formidable force suffered staggering losses. Over 4.2 million men were killed and almost 400,000 were taken prisoner. The sheer scale of the conflict, but also the extraordinary burden borne by the Heer as the primary fighting force for Germany. Despite facing overwhelming odds and a progressively deteriorating strategic and tactical landscape after 1942, the combat effectiveness of the German soldier was reluctantly acknowledged by his adversaries. Historians have noted that even as the situation worsened, the soldiers of the Heer displayed remarkable courage and tenacity on the battlefield. Their ability to persevere under dire circumstances remains a contentious yet undeniable part of their legacy. In his acclaimed book Front Soldaten, Stephen G. Fritz delves into the complex duality of the ordinary German soldier's experience. Fritz observes that these men, regardless of whether their actions were driven by personal conviction or coerced by circumstance, became integral components of a vast and destructive war machine. On one hand, they actively participated in the execution of policies that led to widespread devastation. On the other, they endured the relentless physical hardships, psychological burdens, and crushing anxieties that are the hallmarks of life at the front. This dual role, as both perpetrators of war and victims of its brutality, paints a sobering picture of the human cost of combat. Despite his notorious shortcomings as a military strategist, evident in a series of critical miscalculations from 1940 onward, Hitler inadvertently spurred the development of a formidable fighting machine that, until that time, had no equal in military might. Central to this war apparatus was the Heer, the premier component of the German armed forces whose soldiers battled across an immense geographical expanse. From the rugged terrain of the Caucasus to the searing deserts of North Africa, and from the turbulent shores of the English Channel to the icy reaches of the Arctic Circle, the Heer's presence underscored both the scale and ambition of Nazi Germany's military operations. When the Feldheer, the field army, was deployed for combat, its strategic organisation was meticulously divided into distinct operational theatres. This approach was based on a fundamental principle, separating frontline combat units from the support and administrative elements positioned in the rear. On the battle map, entire divisions or corps formations were arrayed directly against enemy forces, while reserves were strategically held in readiness to reinforce these units at a moment's notice. The frontline and reserve forces were collectively designated as the combat zone, which was immediately followed by the communications zone, a buffer that included the rear areas of individual armies, and further still, the rear zones of entire army groups. Together, these areas comprised a theatre of operations, a flexible framework designed to optimise command and control across diverse and sprawling battlefields. Beyond the active theatres lay the occupied territories, or zones of military administration, which varied dramatically in size, from a handful of square miles to entire nations under German control. The German homeland, positioned farthest from the combat zones, was segmented into military districts. These districts maintained direct lines of communication with both the Feldheer and the Ersatzheer, replacement army, thereby ensuring the smooth and efficient transportation of supplies and reinforcements to the front lines. This logistical network was a critical component of the overall strategy, highlighting how the theatre concept could be adapted seamlessly to accommodate the varying sizes and strengths of the forces available. Throughout World War II, the organisational structure of the Feldheer was in a state of constant evolution. Divisions, corps, and entire armies were regularly realigned among different commands, transferred between operational areas, or reconstituted with replacement troops to compensate for severe combat losses. In many cases, some Heer units were so severely depleted that, while still officially labelled as full divisions or regiments, their actual combat strength fell far short of standard requirements. The largest operational unit within the Feldheer was the Army Group, a massive formation that brought together two or more armies, each with its own integral components of infantry, armour, artillery, and frequently even an air contingent from the Luftwaffe working in close coordination. An army group typically commanded several 100,000 soldiers, making it one of the most significant building blocks of the German military strategy. When an army group was composed entirely of German troops, it was designated as a Heeresgruppe, reflecting its pure national makeup and its central role in executing large-scale campaigns. A prime example of the evolving structure and strategic deployment of the Feldheer is Army Group North, or Heeresgruppe Nord. Established in September 1939 under the leadership of Field Marshal Fedor von Bock and nominally controlled by the OKH throughout the conflict, Army Group North was originally tasked with operations during the invasion of Poland. At that time, its core forces were made up of the 3rd and 4th Armies, with the 10th Panzer Division, along with the 73rd, 206th and 208th Infantry Divisions, held in reserve. This formation showcased the flexible yet robust nature of German military organisation, where rapid mobilisation and integrated support elements were key to operational success. Following the Polish campaign in October 1939, Army Group North was redeployed to the Western Front and redesignated as Army Group B. This reorganisation saw the inclusion of both the 4th and 6th Armies, setting the stage for a major offensive during Case Yellow. On May 10, 1940, when the invasion of France and the Low Countries commenced, Army Group B was a formidable force. It comprised 3 corps from General Georg von Kuchler's 18th Army and 6 corps from General Walter von Reichenau's 6th Army, collectively amounting to 29 divisions. Of these, 23 were infantry divisions, 3 were panzer divisions, 2 were motorized infantry, and 1 was a cavalry division. This diverse composition not only illustrates the breadth of tactical options available to the German command, but also reflects the adaptability of the German military in responding to the dynamic challenges of modern warfare. In preparation for the invasion of the Soviet Union, a new Army Group North was formed on the Eastern Front, drawing heavily on units from Army Group C. Under the command of Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Leeb, this newly constituted formation advanced steadily toward Leningrad. The Army Group was on the verge of capturing the city when Hitler abruptly halted the offensive, opting instead for a strategy of siege warfare intended to starve the civilian population into submission. The resulting 900-day siege of Leningrad ultimately failed to achieve its strategic objectives while sapping considerable German strength. During the initial phase of Operation Barbarossa, this second incarnation of Army Group North was a composite force that included the 18th Army, the 16th Army, the 4th Panzer Army, and several specialised units. This diverse array of combat power was designed to exploit the weaknesses in the Soviet defences, combining mechanised and armoured units with traditional infantry to maximise battlefield effectiveness. As the conflict on the Eastern Front evolved, Army Group North remained a central element of German operations. By October 1941, the Army Group's composition had expanded to include not only the 16th and 18th Armies, but also the Spanish Blue Division, a unit of fascist volunteers from Franco's Spain who had joined the Wehrmacht. This infusion of additional manpower and specialised troops underscored the increasingly international and desperate nature of the Axis war effort. A year later, under the leadership of General von Kuchler, the group was further augmented by the inclusion of the 11th Army, enhancing its overall strength and operational flexibility. In 1944, the bitter battles along the Baltic coast tested the limits of Army Group North over a grueling 7-month period. Command of the Army Group passed through a series of high-ranking officers: Field Marshal Walter Model, Colonel General Georg Lindemann, Colonel General Johannes Friesner, and Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner, each tasked with adapting to the rapidly changing conditions on the front. Their successive leadership highlights both the strategic challenges and the operational demands faced by the German forces in the later stages of the war. In the final months of the conflict, Army Group North was repositioned to operate in Prussia, where it continued to fight with the 16th and 18th Armies, bolstered by a collection of detachments and battle groups hastily assembled in response to the deteriorating situation. In January 1945, during intense combat in Latvia, the Army Group was renamed Army Group Courland. Simultaneously, the remnants of the former Army Group Centre were reorganised and rechristened as a new Army Group North. These last-minute changes reflect the chaotic and desperate efforts of the German military to reconstitute its forces amid the collapsing fronts of a crumbling regime. Army Group B was a designation applied to 3 distinct formations over the course of the war, each reflecting the evolving strategic needs and shifting battlefronts of the German military. Its first incarnation, commanded by Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, comprised roughly 300,000 troops that played a pivotal role during the May 1940 campaigns in Belgium and the Netherlands. This formation was instrumental in executing rapid and forceful manoeuvres that characterized the early successes of the Blitzkrieg strategy in Western Europe. A second Army Group B emerged on the Eastern Front in the lead-up to the summer 1942 Wehrmacht offensive against the Red Army. Drawing primarily from the forces of the former Army Group South, this formation notably included the 6th Army under Field Marshal Friedrich von Paulus. The 6th Army would later become synonymous with disaster during the 6-month-long Battle of Stalingrad, where it was ultimately annihilated by the relentless Soviet counteroffensive. In the aftermath of this catastrophic defeat, the remnants of this second Army Group B were merged with Army Group Don to form a reconstituted Army Group South, a move that underscored the desperate realignments within the German command structure. The third and final incarnation of Army Group B took shape in northern Italy in 1943 under the command of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. As the war progressed, this formation was relocated to France following the Allied D-Day landings. Command subsequently passed to Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge and later to Field Marshal Walter Model, under whose leadership Army Group B became deeply involved in several major engagements. Its elements fought in Normandy, took part in Operation Market Garden, and contributed to the intense Allied airborne and ground offensive in the Netherlands during the autumn of 1944, before playing a significant role in the Ardennes offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. Axis formations that combined German units with those of other nations, most notably the Italian army in North Africa and the Romanian and Hungarian armies on the Eastern Front, were often designated as Armeegruppen. These groupings served as integrated operational units designed to harness the strengths of each national component, facilitating coordinated military efforts across diverse theatres of war. Prior to 1943, the term Armeegruppe was used rather loosely. It encompassed not only fully integrated multinational formations, but also reinforced formations or even large aggregations of specific divisions tailored for particular combat roles. This flexible definition allowed commanders to quickly adapt to evolving battlefield needs by grouping together units that could deliver concentrated firepower or specialized capabilities. As the war advanced and multinational operations became more complex, the structure of the Armeegruppen evolved. In later years, when Axis forces from different nations fought together, the command arrangements typically granted the German headquarters overall control of the Armeegruppe. This centralization of command was intended to ensure a unified strategy, streamline decision-making, and effectively coordinate the diverse contributions of the Allied contingents. Within the Heer, a standard army-sized unit was an impressive formation, typically numbering between 60,000 and 100,000 troops. These armies were organized into one or more corps, each augmented by specialized units that enhanced overall combat capability. A corps itself was a layered structure, consisting of one or more divisions along with reserves and additional support troops. Acting as a vital intermediary, the Corps headquarters bridged the gap between the high-level strategic directives of the army and the tactical execution carried out by divisions or battle groups. Generally, a corps would encompass between 40,000 and 60,000 soldiers, ensuring that both frontline combat elements and essential support functions were well integrated to sustain prolonged operations. The composition of Feldheer divisions during World War II was tailored to their specific roles on the battlefield, resulting in distinct organisational structures for different types of divisions. Infantry divisions, for instance, were assembled quite differently from panzer divisions. A typical infantry division was built around up to 4 regiments, with various attached support units that brought its total strength to between 10,000 and 20,000 men. The division's headquarters played a crucial role in providing tactical field direction for the fighting regiments under its command, ensuring coordinated maneuvers and effective responsiveness during combat. This structured approach not only maximized the combat potential of each division, but also demonstrated the Heer's commitment to operational flexibility and sustained military effectiveness in a rapidly evolving theatre of war. Activated in October 1934, during the early phase of the Heer's expansion, the 1st Infantry Division had its roots in the pre-war Reichswehr. Originally cloaked under a series of euphemistic names to mask its true nature as an infantry formation in violation of the Versailles Treaty, this Wave 1 unit was composed of soldiers drafted in the very first wave of German conscription before World War II erupted. The division quickly proved its operational value on the battlefield. It took part in the Polish campaign as an integral component of the Third Army under General von Küchler's command. After a brief redeployment to France, the 1st Division returned to the Eastern Front, where it became a consistent presence throughout much of the war. It participated in the 18th Army's advance toward Leningrad, engaging in fierce combat around Lake Ladoga, and later was reassigned to the 1st Panzer Army during the harsh winter of 1943. In the final chapters of the conflict, operating alongside the 3rd and 4th Armies, the division found itself locked in brutal fighting against the Soviet Red Army near Königsberg in East Prussia. The relentless demands of combat necessitated significant changes in the division's composition over time. During the Polish campaign, the 1st Division was structured around 3 infantry regiments, the 1st, 22nd and 43rd, supported by an artillery regiment with an attached battalion along with specialised machine gun, anti-tank, pioneer, reconnaissance, signals and medical battalions. This configuration provided a balanced mix of firepower and support capabilities, essential for early war engagements. By 1944, however, the division had adapted to the evolving nature of modern warfare. Its order of battle was modified to include Fusilier Regiment 22, which melded the roles of heavy infantry and reconnaissance to enhance battlefield flexibility, Grenadier Regiments 22 and 43, which continued to deliver the reliable performance of traditional foot soldiers, and Artillery Regiment 1, now reinforced by an additional artillery battalion. These changes, along with other support formations integrated into its structure, reflected a continuous evolution designed to meet the increasingly complex demands of the Eastern Front. Throughout its operational history, the 1st Infantry Division was led by no fewer than 12 different commanders, each contributing to the unit's tactical adaptations and resilience under pressure. This frequent turnover in leadership not only highlighted the intensity of the combat environment, but also underscored the division's ability to maintain cohesion and effectiveness despite the challenges posed by rapidly changing circumstances. The enduring legacy of the 1st Division lies in its evolution from a clandestine formation born out of necessity into a battle-hardened unit that fought across multiple theatres, adapting its structure and command to survive the grueling demands of World War II. Below the division level, the Heer was organised to maximise both flexibility and combat effectiveness. The regiment, typically comprising 2,000 to 6,000 soldiers, was the primary unit responsible for engaging the enemy directly. It was structured to deploy its own organic units, while also incorporating attached formations as needed. In some cases, the regiment was further subdivided into independent battalions, referred to as Abteilungen. These Abteilungen, generally numbering between 500 and 1,000 soldiers, were theoretically the smallest units capable of sustaining independent combat operations. A fully operational Abteilung was a composite formation, often including infantry, artillery, armour, and pioneer elements, bolstered by heavy weapons support from machine gun and mortar units to fulfill its tactical mission. At the tactical echelon, the company played a critical role, typically consisting of 100 to 200 soldiers and organised into 4 or 5 platoons, the primary combat formations of the Heer infantry. Initially, each platoon was divided into squads of 13 soldiers. However, battlefield realities soon dictated a shift to smaller 10-man squads to improve manoeuvrability and effectiveness under fire. Although the highest levels of command were controlled by Hitler through the OKW, field commanders were frequently granted considerable autonomy. This independence allowed junior officers and non-commissioned officers to exercise initiative on the front lines, a quality that became synonymous with the operational spirit of the Heer. This layered organisational structure, from regiment to Abteilung, company, platoon and squad, reflects the Heer's emphasis on both coordinated, large-scale operations and agile, responsive tactics at the grassroots level. By empowering lower-level leaders to make critical decisions during combat, the German military ensured that even its smallest units could adapt swiftly to the unpredictable conditions of warfare. This blend of rigorous organisation and decentralised command was a cornerstone of the Heer's ability to maintain its operational effectiveness throughout the conflict. Combat operations within the Heer frequently saw the rapid formation of self-contained battle groups, known as Kampfgruppen. These versatile units were assembled directly in the field from whatever forces were available, providing a complete range of ground capabilities. Ranging in size from large corps-level formations to smaller battalion or company groups, a typical Kampfgruppe combined elements of infantry, armour, artillery and anti-tank units, augmented by support troops such as pioneers and medical detachments. This integrated mix allowed for a flexible and adaptive response to the fluid and unpredictable nature of warfare. Often, these temporary formations were named after their commanding officer and tasked with executing specific missions. The Kampfgruppe concept was a standard feature of Heer tactical doctrine, embodying the Army's emphasis on decentralized command and rapid, mission-focused assembly. In many ways, this approach mirrored the combat command structures later employed by the US Army during World War II, as both were designed to harness a diverse array of combat elements into a single, coherent force capable of independent, decisive action on the battlefield. In the wake of their defeat at El Alamein in the autumn of 1942, Axis forces in North Africa were forced into a desperate retreat, scrambling across hundreds of miles of unforgiving desert, with Allied forces advancing from both the east and west. German and Italian units, under Generals Erwin Rommel and Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, faced the constant threat of being severed from one another as they pulled back toward the Tunisian coast. To counter this risk and maintain critical lines of withdrawal, several flexible battle groups known as Kampfgruppen were swiftly assembled to secure key mountain passes and slow the enemy's advance. One particularly noteworthy formation was Kampfgruppe Fuhlreder, created in February 1943 under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Fritz Fuhlreder. Tasked with defending the strategic Fonduk passes over a 65-kilometer front, this battle group brought together a diverse and formidable mix of forces. It fielded 12 infantry companies, 9 German and 3 Italian, backed by 14 Italian field guns and 3 smaller German artillery pieces. The unit also incorporated The 334th Armoured Car Battalion, which operated light anti-aircraft guns and two 88mm cannons that, although originally intended for air defence, proved lethal in an anti-tank capacity. Additionally, a platoon of elite special forces from the famed Brandenburg Regiment was attached, further enhancing the group's combat flexibility. This well-rounded assembly launched a determined counterattack against US forces that had previously dislodged its forward elements and seized a nearby village, marking a significant tactical success in the midst of a chaotic retreat. Reinforcements soon arrived in the form of the 190th Reconnaissance Battalion, which enabled full ride to dismantle enemy lines in Poland, across the vast expanses of the Soviet Union and throughout much of Western Europe. Equally notable was the Feldheer's capacity for robust defensive operations. When forced into a defensive posture, the German military leveraged the initiative and resourcefulness of its junior officers and non-commissioned officers, while battle-hardened soldiers, driven by a grim determination to defend the fatherland, fought with relentless tenacity. This dual capacity for explosive offensive maneuvers and resilient defensive action not only underscored the strategic adaptability of the German military, but also ensured that, even in retreat, its formations remained a potent force on the battlefield. It's almost unbelievable to think that just 20 years before World War II, Germany was in total ruin. Crippled by the Treaty of Versailles, its military was gutted, its economy shattered, and its people left humiliated. And yet, in just 2 decades, it rebuilt itself into one of the most determined and formidable fighting forces in history. The Heer rose from the ashes of defeat, transforming from a small restricted army into a war machine capable of taking on the world's greatest powers. This was no accident. It was the result of intense training, tactical innovation, and an unwavering belief in military tradition. As we've explored in this video, the German army of World War II was an unparalleled war machine, highly organised, fiercely disciplined, and exceptionally adaptable. From its smallest squads to its massive army groups, the Heer was structured with a level of tactical and strategic efficiency that made it one of the most formidable fighting forces in history. It combined rigorous training, advanced operational doctrine, and an emphasis on decentralized command, allowing even lower-ranking officers and non-commissioned officers to take initiative in the heat of battle. This blend of well-drilled infantry, innovative use of armour, artillery and air support, and an unwavering sense of duty made the Wehrmacht a force that repeatedly outmatched its enemies in the early years of the war. The effectiveness of the German military wasn't just about superior weapons or technology, it was about how those weapons were used. The Blitzkrieg strategy revolutionized modern warfare, allowing Germany to conquer vast territories at an unprecedented speed. Coordinated attacks between mechanized infantry, armored divisions and air support ensured that enemy defenses were overwhelmed before they could effectively react. The ability to rapidly exploit weaknesses and execute swift, decisive maneuvers ensured early German victories in Poland, France, and deep into the Soviet Union. Even when the tide of war turned against Germany, the resilience of the Heer remained remarkable. As supply lines stretched thin and the Allies gained superiority in both numbers and resources, German troops continued to fight with extraordinary tenacity. The tactical ingenuity displayed on both the offensive and defensive fronts, whether in the desperate urban combat of Stalingrad, the brutal retreats across the Eastern Front, or the last-ditch counter-offensives like the Battle of the Bulge, cemented the reputation of the German soldier as highly skilled and fiercely determined. Today, the tactics and strategies employed by the Wehrmacht are still studied in military academies worldwide. Modern armed forces analyse German operational planning, combined arms warfare, and mission command principles, where leaders at all levels are entrusted to make battlefield decisions independently. While the legacy of Nazi Germany is condemned, the military effectiveness of the Heer remains a subject of study, not for ideological admiration, but for understanding the evolution of warfare and learning from both its strengths and its failures. And with that, we wrap up today's video. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here until the end. Your support truly means the world to me. A huge shout out to my amazing patrons. If you'd like to support the channel or get access to some exclusive content, the links to my Patreon and Instagram are down below. I hope you learned something new, and as always, I'll see you in the next adventure. Take care and goodbye for now.